In this sequence, I'm going to illustrate for you the many different parts of America in which I grew up, and by which I came to have a very deep and widespread understanding of America. I thought I would start here with just a couple of images. This is shortly after I was born. That's my mother, that's my father, and that's my Aunt Laura, and that of course is me. I was born May 19th, 1955 in Washington, D.C. My mother was then residing at the house where she grew up, and which is today the house of my Aunt Laura, all these 50 and more years later. The sword, as I mentioned before in one of the earlier videos, is the sword presented to my great-grandfather, Captain and then Major and then Colonel John T. Nance. This was presented to him by the cadets of the University of California at Berkeley, class of 1907. And the second photograph relates to part of the story of America that I'm going to tell you. This is our family getting ready to drive across country. This was taken at our family home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, before we embarked on a cross-country camping journey, filling a month that took us from the East Coast, Delaware, all the way to San Diego, the West Coast, and many points in between. Well, hopefully this will work. This is the first time I've done this, although I've planned it for some time. I'm going to relate to you all of the different parts of America that I came to know from my birth through to today. And I have, on the other side of this red board, some notes as to all those different places. Hopefully I won't overlook any as I go through the series. As I mentioned, I was born in Washington, D.C., so I start out putting a marker there. There we are. Get over here. My father was at that time serving on a destroyer in the Mediterranean, so he wasn't there. When he came back, my parents and I went to Key West, Florida, but I'm not going to put a pin there because I was so little in those days that I can't claim to have obtained any knowledge of Florida from my time there, which was only a few months. From Key West, we then transferred to New London, Connecticut, where my father attended the submarine school based there. So now we have Connecticut. From Connecticut, he then was assigned to his first submarine, the diesel submarine, the Wahoo. And so then we were transferred to Hawaii. Now, this map does not display Hawaii in its correct location. They have made an insert for it, but in reality, of course, Hawaii is way out in the ocean. So here we have the West Coast, the East Coast to the West Coast, and then you have to go that same distance again to get out to Hawaii, which is way out here. So I'm going to put a pin over in the Pacific Ocean over here to represent our first time to Hawaii. Oh, can you see that? Not quite. Let me move it over. There, that stands for Hawaii. Now from Hawaii, my father then chose to go into the nuclear program of the Navy and the Navy Nuclear Power School. is in Idaho Falls, Idaho. I probably don't have the correct spot in Idaho, but that'll be close enough for present purposes. Now, when we were in Connecticut, the submarine base, my next youngest brother was born, and when we were in Idaho Falls, my youngest brother, the last child in the family, was born. From Idaho Falls, we went on visits to Yellowstone and Grand Teton, and we made repeated visits there later during our lives. So I will put in a pin for Yellowstone at the present time, and not only because that's the first time we went, and some of my very early memories are of that, but because we went back there many times afterwards. Yellowstone. Now, from the Navy Nuclear Power School, my father was then assigned to the first nuclear submarine, about which I've spoken in, the first for him, that is, about which I've spoken in earlier videos, the submarine Shark, which was constructed at Newport News Naval Shipyard. We lived in Hampton Roads. As I mentioned before, I attended the launching of that ship. Moreover, I have a very vivid memory of having Thanksgiving dinner aboard the submarine, including going along the gangplank when I was just 5 years old, entering the hatchway of the conning tower, and going down what was an extremely long ladder when you're just a little 5-year-old, and then having Thanksgiving dinner aboard. The reason was that my father was the officer who had the duty. There must be an officer aboard every naval warship in commission at all times, and the junior officers rotate those duties. He happened to have the duty on Thanksgiving, and so we had Thanksgiving dinner in the wardroom. I have discovered and purchased a video, promotional video prepared by the Navy in those years, encouraging people to join the submarine service, and it was actually filmed aboard the Shark, and in fact shows that very wardroom where I had Thanksgiving dinner in 1961 or 1962. It was in Hampton Roads that I attended nursery school, kindergarten, and then elementary school at Wythe Elementary in Hampton Roads. From Hampton Roads, we then went up, we made repeated visits back to Chevy Chase, Maryland, which will be represented by this pin for Washington. And that, of course, is the house where this photograph here was taken. We then went again to Connecticut. That's when my father was transferred to the submarine, the missile submarine, Abraham Lincoln. We then lived in Mystic, Connecticut. Our house was right on the Mystic River. It was 61 River Road. Since those days, additional houses have been built, and the house has been renumbered, but it still stands, and I have taken both of my children there during visits to Mystic Seaport. We live directly across the river from the seaport, so for second grade and third grade, I had a very pleasant time living on a 2.5-acre property with a large house. Now, millions of Americans have gone right past that house. The reason it was available to us for rent was that Interstate 95 was being built right next to the backyard. And in fact, a small portion of the property was taken by eminent domain because it was necessary for the freeway. Therefore, everyone going north on Interstate 95 through Connecticut after New London and just before crossing the Mystic River goes right by that house. Of all of the different houses and places we lived in, that really was my favorite. And I loved going there and living there and being able to wander the woods. We had a large apple orchard on the property, and it was a very good time. Now, from New London, my father was then transferred to San Diego, and he and my mother conceived the wonderful idea of camping across country. And let me move forward to pull up this photograph that I mentioned earlier. my parents bought this Land Rover and this canoe, and here we are just before we were to embark. This was taken in the driveway of our house at Rehoboth Beach, and I am the fella here in the broad hat, and my two brothers on either side, my mother and my father. And after this photograph was taken, we all piled into the car. In the back here, we had our Labrador Retriever, Jack, Black Jack of Torngat, and off we went on a journey across the United States. Now, on this journey across the United States, we went up to, I missed one thing, but I'll put it in quickly right now. While we were living in New London, we went on a wonderful vacation trip, canoeing and camping in the lakes of Minnesota. At Ely, Minnesota, we flew to Duluth. That was a quite memorable experience, and I'll plug that one in right now. Now, okay, back to the trip. So we started off across country, and I won't hit all of the spots that we visited, but we went to Niagara Falls. So from Delaware, up through here to Niagara Falls, crossed into Canada, came back down into the United States, and among the many places I remember are the Black Hills of South Dakota and the Badlands, which I'll put roughly there, Mount Rushmore, the Devil's Tower in Wyoming, down into across Utah. I don't personally remember the Great Salt Lake or Salt Lake City, so I won't put a pin there, but I'm sure that we went there. Across through Nevada, and then to Tioga Pass, entry into California and Yosemite National Park. After Yosemite National Park, down through California to San Diego. Let me check my notes, make sure I didn't overlook anything. Yeah, it looks good enough. We were in San Diego. I started 4th grade there, and but in the middle of the year, my father's submarine, the Scamp, a nuclear attack submarine, was transferred to Mare Island Navy Base next to Vallejo in the San Francisco Bay Area. From that period, we spent about 6 months. I lived on the Navy base, and my father had previously sought approval from the Navy for him to obtain a master's degree in political science. He applied to and was accepted at Stanford University, and so we moved to Menlo Park, California. Our address was 20 Barney Court. So after having completed 4th grade at the base school in Mare Island, I then had 5th grade, 6th grade, and the first part of 7th grade in Menlo Park, going to Las Lomitas School and then La Entrada School. Now in the summers, for 2 summers, I went to a summer camp in the Sierras, Grizzly Lodge, and that provided a great experience in the high Sierras with boating and shooting, all of the various activities available up there. Make sure I don't lose my map here. Let me take a brief moment to make sure my map doesn't fall down. Sorry for the interruption. Now, after my father obtained his master's degree in political science from Stanford, he was then appointed to the command of the nuclear missile submarine Grant. This entailed some additional training programs and preparation programs, so we did not go straight from Menlo Park to Hawaii. Instead, we went in the middle of my 7th grade year back to Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I spent a couple of months in 7th grade at Leland Junior High School in Chevy Chase. So here we are back to Washington again, the Washington suburbs. And from there we then proceeded to Hawaii, and this was quite an adventure. We decided after a family discussion to travel to Hawaii by ocean liner. So we flew to Los Angeles, and I'll put a pin there because I came back to Los Angeles in the future, so I got to know it pretty well. We went to Disneyland, we went to Knott's Berry Farm, and then we boarded the ocean liner the Lurleen, and we sailed off to Hawaii for our second residence in Hawaii. So back to Hawaii again, representing that Hawaii. So I completed my 7th grade year at Iolani School, which is a pier of Punahou, where President Obama went to school for all of his time in Hawaii. And we were there for the completion of 7th grade year and all of my 8th grade year. We went on various island trips. We visited Lanai, we visited Maui, we visited the Big Island, so we saw quite a lot of Hawaii. We lived in the neighborhood called Wailai Kahala, and the address was 945 Makaiwa Street, and I have found it on Google Earth, and it still exists. It's near the Kahala Hilton. Now, from Hawaii, the submarine, as I have mentioned in another video, was designated for conversion to the Poseidon missile system, and the submarine was also due for a general overhaul, and that was scheduled for the submarine base at Hood Canal, Washington, and so we moved to Bremerton, Washington, which is across Puget Sound from Seattle. Now, relatively shortly after we arrived there, my parents had always planned that I would attend St. Albans School. They felt that it was important to go to one school throughout all of high school, and my father had attended St. Albans School in Washington, D.C., so I applied, I was accepted, and so I went to become a boarding student at St. Albans School in Washington, D.C. So, back once again to Washington. And that's where I was up until the age 18 when I went to college. So this map shows you the different parts of America that I had come to know through living and visiting prior to being this age. That's all of America that I had come to know when I was 18. Now, in choosing colleges, I had a desire to go back to the West Coast after 4 years on the East Coast. As you can tell by this history, I had grown up going from coast to coast, back and forth, and so I had just spent 4 years primarily on the East Coast, although for my first 2 years I had repeatedly returned to Bremerton for family vacations and for the summers. We went on camping trips and skiing trips in the Olympic Peninsula, and we went dove hunting and pheasant hunting at various places, and so I got to know the area. And then while I was still a boarding student at St. Albans, my father's submarine, the Grant, after being converted, was transferred to Charleston, South Carolina. So I visited in Charleston. I spent a summer there and a couple of vacations there. Before my father was then relieved from command of the submarine and appointed to the staff of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. So in my senior year, my parents moved and my brothers came back to Washington, D.C. And so in my senior year in high school, I was no longer a boarding student, but lived in our family home on Reno Road in Washington, D.C. Then when I applied to colleges, I wanted to go back to the West Coast. So I applied to, and I was accepted by Pomona College, located in the Los Angeles area. It's actually in Claremont, about 35 miles east of Los Angeles. And I very much enjoyed Pomona College. I studied English and philosophy there, and found it a very good college to attend. However, as I related in an earlier video, I determined that I needed to study architecture. I needed to focus on architecture as the creative field that would be the most instrumental in helping me develop as a creative person, whether I ultimately ended up being an architect or in some other creative field. That was what I felt I needed to study. And so I looked around, I did some research. The #1 architecture school in the country was MIT. And so I transferred to MIT in my junior year, my senior year, and graduated from MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, across the Charles River from Boston. Once I graduated, and I was taking a year off before continuing with the master's program, I was looking for an opportunity to be an apprentice architect. There was an economic recession going on at the time. This was the spring and summer of 1977. And so I felt that it was more likely that the economy for the construction industry, and thus the architecture field, would be better in a part of the country where the weather was good all year round, and therefore you didn't have any delays due to the weather. So I decided to go back to Los Angeles. So here we are again, Los Angeles. I lived in a one-room apartment right on the beach in Venice, and I did not find work in architecture. I supported myself by joining the Carpenters Union briefly, being an apprentice carpenter, and through signing up with temporary agencies just to do office work. And I have a number of anecdotes and stories from that time that many people have found amusing, but aren't quite the thing to put in this video at this time. I also was writing short stories, and I was checking out the film industry to the extent that I could. Venice is a part of the LA area where television shows often film outdoor sequences. And so I was able to hang out on the sets of a number of TV shows, including The Rockford Files with James Garner, and I got a very favorable impression of Mr. Garner as a drunk stumbled onto the set one time, and without any rancor at all, really with a lot of good humor, James Garner himself came out and politely guided this drunk out of the camera range so that they could go ahead and shoot a particular car crash scene that they were setting up at the time. But in hanging out around these film sets, I just didn't get a good vibe, so to speak, a good feel for that as a world that I would want to be part of. It's long been notorious in Hollywood that the work of the screenwriter is not treated with any respect. The writer is the guy left sitting in the car outside of the producer's house while the producer and the director tear up the writer's script. So on the other hand, I was feeling pretty lonely just writing short stories. I needed human interaction, so I decided I would write theater. And I did some research, and the best town in America for new playwrights was San Francisco, so I got on the bus and went up to San Francisco to start my theater career. In the first video that I shot for this series of videos, I discussed in detail my theatrical career, and I won't repeat it here, but suffice it to say it was a marvelous, wonderful experience. In many ways the high point of my life. As I mentioned in that video, I wound up not being a writer, but a producer, and I did that for about 10 years until I decided to go to law school. But before I jump into that, let me share with you a photograph that has appeared in the background of a number of these videos. This was taken during the time I was producing theater in the mid-1980s, and was part of the series of shots that I had done when I thought I might want to be an actor. But as I mentioned there, I really hate memorizing lines, certainly not lines written by other people, and indeed not lines written by myself either. And people watching these videos may notice certain performance defects that perhaps made it wise for me to choose not to be an actor. Now, as I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, as a producer, the shows I created received opportunities to go on tour to New York. Excuse me, let me put New York on here. And the American Music Theater Festival in Philadelphia, as well as to Los Angeles, where we already have a pin, up to Seattle, where we have a pin. I also had productions for Antenna Theater in Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, and also New York City. And so I got to know those areas as a result of my theater touring. I also went to New York City many times because my Aunt Catherine lived there and was married to an actor, Martin Priest, and so I would go to New York to stay with them. I saw a number of musicals there during those many visits, and also, of course, I was there to see productions at of the Wooster Group at the Performing Garage. I also flew with George Coates from San Francisco to New York in 1984 for the sole purpose of seeing the production of Robert Wilson's Einstein on the Beach, a major seminal work of avant-garde theater, which both George and I felt you could not really be au courant in the avant-garde art world if you had not seen that production. So we flew across country just to see that. As I related in the other videos, my productions also toured in Europe, and one of those tours, as it turns out the last tour, took me to Yugoslavia and Poland, and my experiences behind the Iron Curtain, meeting young adventurous people such as myself and seeing the effects of socialism and communism on their climate of opportunities for them, both economic and psychological, led me to decide that it was time to leave the art world and to go into an area of life that would have more significance to the people of the world generally, or at least would give me the opportunity to do that. And so I decided to go back home to Washington, D.C. I applied to and was accepted at Georgetown University Law Center. So from San Francisco, I went back yet again to Washington, D.C., this time to attend law school. And let me for a moment consult my notes, make sure I haven't overlooked anything. Yes, I have overlooked a very significant point. This is going to be the subject of an entire separate video and relates very significantly to racial relations in the United States of America. It's a delicate issue. My family home, my grandmother, Grandma Brinny, in 1944 engaged a live-in servant, Mamie Booker, who was African American. She taught me what love is, to be blunt about it. She retired in 1966, and because of my many travels here, I did not see her very frequently. You know, even though she was about 11 I was 11 when she retired. But she made a tremendous impact upon me. She came from rural Virginia, Esmont, Virginia to be precise, and her grandfather had been a slave. When she retired, she went back down, actually to Cumberland, Virginia. That's where her husband's lived and where her husband's family was from. And there were a number of family tragedies that struck that I will relate in the other video that caused her to move up to New York and work for my Aunt Catherine for a while, to come back and do some summers with my Grandma Brinny. And then she went back down to Esmont with her own aunt, Aunt Bertha, and they moved into a house built by Mamie's grandfather, and in Esmont, with several acres of land around it. You had to go down a dirt road to get to it. I went there many times, as I will discuss in the other video. I would go down and spend long weekends, sometimes a week or more at a stretch, and I did that from the time I went to St. Albans in 1969 all the way up until the time I got married in 1991. And as I will show in the other video, I received many letters from Mamie, and of course I wrote her many letters, and I saved all of her letters, or at least I intended to save all of them, and I have a vast number. My aunt and Laura and my mother and my Aunt Catherine and my Grandma Brinny all remained very close to Mamie throughout their lives and her life. She died in 1994, and I will acquaint you with the circumstances of that in the other video. So, the pin that I should have mentioned earlier and should have put in is for Esmont, Virginia, which is in the countryside southwest of Charlottesville. It was through those experiences that I obtained a familiarity with the African American culture in America that I believe, and I think I will substantiate, is unique among white people in America, in my opinion, and I will present the reasons for that in the other video. But I was down there many times. So let me bring back this photograph, because I should have said that that experience was an intimate part of my experience of America by the time I was this age, and it continued to be an intimate part of my experience in America when I was this age, and indeed all through my the following years up until Mamie's death. And I have gone back down there a couple of times. I've visited her gravesite. I will talk about those in another video. A couple of other points. While we were living in Washington, D.C., while I was still at St. Albans School, we also took a vacation trip canoeing on the Allagash River in Maine, and so let me put in a pin for that one as well. A couple of other points of interest here. When I went to Pomona College initially, instead of flying from Washington to the Los Angeles area, I took the train. So I took the train across country. I don't think that journey earns any pins particularly, but it was definitely a way of seeing more of America, and I'll briefly outline the route that that train took. Also, while I was at Pomona College, on vacationing, we went on one spring vacation, went to the Grand Canyon, went hiking down from the north rim of the Grand Canyon down to the base of it. We also went by Bryce Canyon as well. And so those get a pin. One's enough, I suppose. worthy of mention. Sorry, I keep overlooking things. When I decided to move from Los Angeles, this was during my several months there as an apprentice carpenter and a temporary office worker and living at the beach in Venice. When I decided to move up to California, I said I took the bus. Well, I took the bus from Los Angeles up to Monterey, and then I put on my backpack and I hiked up the coast. First I went Monterey around the scenic drive down to Carmel, then across the peninsula, and then up the coast all the way to across to Stanford University, where I sacked out with my brother, and then I would take the train up to San Francisco, and I did some roommate hunting. Eventually I found a roommate opportunity right in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. So let me put in a pin for that hike up the coast of California. Got so many pins there, I think I need to give up. Now, once I came to law school, okay, so one more brief break. Before going to law school, the array of the pins, the parts of America that I had come to know, include all of this. Now, in law school, I had been hoping that I would secure a position with a law firm in Washington because it was my intention to obtain a law degree and then see if there might not be some way in which I could become involved in some of the significant public policy issues of the day. Whether that might be by being a political staffer or a member of a law firm, I really didn't know. However, I financed my entire law school career on loans, so as a practical matter I needed to make money. My summer associate position between the second and third years of law school was with a firm Rubenbaum, Levin, Constant, and Friedman, with offices in Rockefeller Center, New York City. So in that summer I was in New York City, and my cousin, first cousin, Benjamin Worthington Euster, graciously allowed me to stay in his apartment rent-free while he was in upstate New York that summer. So that was another excellent exposure to New York City. And they gave me an offer. So it looked like an offer of permanent employment after graduation. So it appeared to me that despite my desire to be in Washington, it looked like I would be going to New York City, which was not a bad thing. I've always wanted to live in New York City, but my preference for being involved in public policy issues meant that Washington was a better choice. At a party, I met a woman named Kevin Irby, and she also had been involved in the San Francisco art world before deciding that she too wanted to get involved in more significant public policy issues. She had been, she was the daughter of a former governor of Iowa, Norman Irby. That had assisted her in obtaining a position with the campaign of Iowa Senator Grassley, and he was victorious. I believe it was the re-election campaign of '86. So she came to Washington, and she became a specialist in public communications in the healthcare field. And at the time I met her at this party, she was a political appointee under the first President Bush in the field, in the agency that runs Medicare and Medicaid. And we hit it off immediately because we were both people who had been intimately involved in the San Francisco art and intellectual world, who now had both chosen to go into the more serious public policy world focused on Washington. We rapidly became engaged and got married in September of 1991. And this was a wonderful opportunity for me to gain familiarity with Iowa because my father-in-law was now a former governor of the state, so of course he knew it extremely well. They resided in Boone, Iowa, At the time we married, and Governor Irby's wife, Jacqueline Doran Irby, was one of the trustees of the Mamie Eisenhower House there. So I had many times when I would fly to Des Moines, and Governor Irby would pick us up and we would drive up to Boone. Later on, they left Boone and moved to Des Moines, so I had many visits to Des Moines. So Iowa gets a pin. I'll now put that between Des Moines and Boone. Pretty much explains the point I'm trying to make. Now this pretty much completes the array of pins that I would cite for experiences that gave me an understanding of what America is today and who the American people are. As a lawyer, of course, I did a lot of business traveling that took me to even more parts of the country, and I'm going to put some pins in for that, but rather than use gold pins, I'm going to use silver ones to reflect the fact that while they were very interesting experiences, I wouldn't say that they were of the same formative and informing level as these. Business trips, of course, are taken for purposes of business, and your mind is primarily occupied with the business goal you are trying to achieve in making that trip. So while you get to see an area, oftentimes you simply see the airport, your hotel, the taxi cab, the office of your client, perhaps a courtroom. You get to go out to dinner a few times with local counsel. But unless you're there for a long period of time, you don't particularly learn too much. There were two of these trips that were such long periods of time that I will give them a gold pin. One of my cases, representing savings and loans, suing the federal government, I represented D&N Bank, which was headquartered in Hancock, Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula. So here's the Upper Peninsula. The Keweenaw Peninsula is the Upper Peninsula of that. Houghton and Hancock are the two towns across a canal from each other. And I went up there one summer and spent 3 straight weeks defending depositions of all of the bank executives and meeting with our clients. And I got to know that community a bit. I attended the Episcopal Church there in Houghton. Went out to brunch with some of the people in that church. On my time off, I did a lot of traveling around the area. So I'll give the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula a gold pin. The other long-term experience was Stockton, California, the headquarters of American Savings Bank in those days prior to 1996 when it was acquired by Washington Mutual Bank of Seattle. And I went out there, from the moment I arrived at Arnold and Porter, I was involved in representing American Savings Bank and its owners and investors in what was one of the biggest lawsuits against the federal government and of all of the banking cases. And Stockton, being the corporate headquarters, was also the repository for this vast collection of documents. So I spent a week now and then in Stockton, and went to the Episcopal Church there when I was there on Sundays, and got to know some of the people there, the restaurants, local people. So I'll give Stockton a gold pin. Roughly speaking, that's the spot that it is. As to the other places I went, I had many trips to Texas. The investors in American Savings Bank were Robert Bass, the Robert M. Bass Group of Fort Worth, his chief lieutenant, David Bonderman. So I went to Fort Worth many times to meet with our clients and also to defend government depositions of our clients, including Mr. Bass, in Fort Worth. Let's see. Let me make sure I get the right spots here. I also took trips to Dallas because some of the executives of another of the savings and loans I represented, although they had left that when that was Superior Bank of Hinsdale, Illinois, they were down there in Dallas, so I went down there to defend their depositions. Also, in 1996, when the plaintiffs group, the 65 different plaintiff law firms all over the country, needed to coordinate their efforts in the Court of Federal Claims so that you wouldn't have one plaintiff saying things that contradicted another plaintiff if you could avoid it. And I was the chief coordinator for that effort. One of our initial organizing meetings was in Houston. Also, while I was at Arnold & Porter, we represented a government contractor with facilities all around the country. The government made a civil accusation of some sort of misconduct against them. They brought that in El Paso, so I had a number of trips to El Paso and also to San Antonio relating to that case. I also had, actually this is a gold pin one. We also represented a meatpacking plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They were charged with the violations of the environmental laws, and in fact the corporation admitted to the violations. In fact, the corporation was the entity that reported the violations to the government. So the issue on which we represented the corporation was essentially an attempt to cooperate, and not an attempt, we did cooperate with the government, but an attempt to obtain a smaller fine than might otherwise be imposed. This involved my visiting Sioux Falls, South Dakota many times, some of them for days on end, reviewing documents, meeting with witnesses, defending witnesses, and indeed counseling witnesses who were about to go before the grand jury. So that was a sufficient amount of time that I think Sioux Falls gets a gold pin. As I mentioned, Washington Mutual Bank bought American Savings Bank. That meant that the headquarters then transferred to Seattle. Thus, I had many business trips to Seattle with meetings in one of the conference rooms near the top of the great big Washington Mutual building there. So I won't put another pin there because I already have a Seattle pin. Let's see if there are any other areas I've overlooked. When I was clerking for a federal judge Andewelt of the Court of Federal Claims, that court is unique in that it has nationwide jurisdiction. If you want to sue the federal government for breach of contract, or you've paid tax money to the government and you want to get it back, or in a number of other contexts, you must file, and the damages you claim are over a certain minimum, you must file your case in the Court of Federal Claims. The judge then travels to where the plaintiff is, unless for various reasons the plaintiff agrees that the trial can be held in Washington, D.C., where the court is headquartered. While I was clerking for Judge Andewelt, we had two cases where we traveled to other cities to conduct the case. The first of those was in Pittsburgh. And the second was in Atlanta. So that involved spending a week in each place. But I don't give it a gold pin because I was tied up in the courtroom all day long. Here's Atlanta. Now, while I was at St. Albans, we had a family reunion, a Sisson family reunion and a Purnell family reunion. If you've seen the genealogy video, you'll know that over here in my father's genealogy line, you have James Karstaffen Purnell, and his daughter married Thomas Upton Sisson I, and they were prominent citizens, both families were, of Winona, Mississippi. And so there are periodically reunions of the Sisson family and the Purnell family, and I went to the reunion in 1973 in Winona, Mississippi. me check my list, see if I've overlooked anything. Illinois, Chicago. I should have, with our president coming from Chicago. Among the banks that I represented, Superior Bank was one. Superior Bank was acquired by the Pritzker interests in partnership with an investor from New York City named Alvin Dworman. The primary plaintiff in the case, the driving force in the case, really was the Pritzker side of the investment. And this involved my going to Chicago for meetings and for depositions, including attending as assistant defendant the deposition of one of the chief tax people for all of the Pritzker interests. And that was a very educational experience for issues relating generally to public policy in America. And so I did not defend the deposition, which means the lawyer who's on record and who objects to the questions and so forth. I was his assistant, but I'm on the transcript and I will talk about that experience and the lessons that it gives for America generally in a separate video. But that involved going to Chicago several times, so Chicago gets a silver pin. Let me see if I've left anything out. I suppose I should include a silver pin for Detroit, Michigan, as well as for the Keweenaw Peninsula. I went to Detroit to defend depositions of D&N bank executives if those depositions did not occur up in the Keweenaw. This included visiting Flint, Michigan, as well as Detroit. I suppose I could put in a pin, but the area is already so much covered with pins. During the process of pursuing the American Savings case in the Court of Federal Claims, the government deposed many of our executives, including Andrew Fuhrer and Mario Antocci and David Bonderman. And of course Robert Bass. The depositions of Bonderman, Antocci, and Fuhrer took place either in Lake Tahoe, where Fuhrer and Antocci live, down in the LA area for a time with Bonderman, and also a bank executive named Robert Barnum. And also we had a very memorable experience defending additional depositions of Mr. Bonderman in Aspen, near his home in Snowmass. So I won't put new pins in for those areas, but Aspen, Colorado gets a silver pin. I may need my glasses to know exactly where to put it. Well, I'll put it there and I hope I'm not too far off. I think it's fair enough to say that's about enough. So there were a few other places I visited, but there's not much point in adding more pins to the map. This experience is what I cite as the foundation for my credibility as one who is knowledgeable about what America can do and what America will do in response to the various issues facing the human race on this planet. And I suggest that there are very few other commentators or contributors to the public policy debate in America who can match this record. We are accustomed in the United States to receiving our words of wisdom from persons who cite as the basis of their credibility and knowledge their academic degrees. And I certainly have good academic credentials, being magna cum laude in top 10% of the class at Georgetown University Law Center, and also an A average graduate, holder of a Bachelor of Science from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But I have this. And when you combine that with the depth of the genealogical background, the family heritage, which resonates with me today. As you can see, we have many mementos from those times, and thus it isn't simply a matter of names on a dusty piece of paper, but a knowledge of our family history and what our family has done in this country and for this country in the past that gives resonance to my observations on America, and I believe helps informs and make more accurate what those observations are. It is this basis of knowledge that I offer to you in presuming to write a book that I call America the Great. This geographic scope and exposure and involvement with so many different peoples of America, the historical scope with roots into 6 of the 13 original colonies and very deep roots into the creation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the fact that I'm trained in the arts, in the sciences, and in law, and did very well in all of them, and also in management. To my surprise, as a theater producer, I was successful. The tangible results are there. That was made possible due to the ability to relate to people, to organize people, to motivate people, to understand how you create something that other people want to buy. That is the essential talent for creating jobs. And many people come before America and they say, I can create jobs. And then you say, how do you do it? And they say, well, we just need some different laws. But they have not been real job creators themselves. I have, and I know what it takes. I know what is involved in it. So it is this depth of background, both in terms of the different fields in which I am a proven thinker, the geographic scope, the historical scope, that I submit to you is a credible foundation for you to take a look at my book, America the Great, and to draw from it lessons that will help you understand what America is, what America can do, and what America will do in response to the challenges that face us today and in the future. Thank you.